It was all meant to be a fun children's day. All I wanted was to make the kids smile. All I wanted was to organize an event that would celebrate their imagination in bright colors and laughter. All I wanted was to do good. Yet I hear no laughter now. Joy has fled from my corner of the world. All I hear are my own tortured sobs. For my dreams have been crushed. Children's Sci-Fi Saturday is doomed to fail. And it will fail because of me. It will fail because I didn't account for the element of the unknown. The old factory was a perfect canvas for my Imaginarium. Sitting on the outskirts of the city, it has always been a prominent feature of the local skyline. Abandoned and decrepit, it was the first thing you would see when arriving by train. Most called the factory an eyesore, but where others saw discomforting brutalism, I saw promise. During the First Republic, the factory was used for making soap. After the war, when the Bolsheviks took over, it was used for financial fraud. After Revolution, when everything was privatized, it was used for financial fraud once more, just less brazenly so. I had spent much of my early youth gazing out of train windows watching the old factory, letting my imagination go wild with the possibility of what it contained. It wasn't until the early 2000s that I finally managed to enter the cement monolith. My body was sleek with sweat and my jaw was exhausted with chemical stimulation. It was the early 2000s and a techno music craze was at its peak. The concrete of the factory floor was illuminated by bright neon and heated with masses of writhing flesh. In the depths of ecstasy and the peaks of my youth, I finally entered the temple of mystery. The pulsing echoes of the music did not leave my eardrums until the following afternoon. The memories of that drug-fueled night stayed with me for years. 2 decades later, I found myself gazing out of the train window once more. The idea must have been always with me, for it came to me whole with dizzying swiftness. All it needed was the years to ferment. 2 decades later, I looked at the old soap factory and thought, this would be a fantastic place for a Children's Day event. It did not take long for a theme to emerge. The colors of my wild youth had burned themselves into the innards of that empty building. Before I could phrase my thoughts into words, I knew that the event would be one rooted in a bright hue of neon. In a world where the future seems bleak, I found it important, necessary even, to paint a brighter version. Children's Sci-Fi Saturday is what I wrote on a napkin as the plan cascaded through my mind. Within 3 days, I had secured a tour through the premises. Within a week, I had obtained a lease agreement and set a date for the event. I did not hesitate in who would provide the dashes of color that would illuminate the special day. Karol Neznam, a childhood friend, a man who I often considered a brother to me. After graduation, he moved to the capital and worked as a lighting specialist, focusing specifically on children's events. Even though the two of us had not shared words for years, he accepted my offer without hesitation. The match seemed destined. The two of us working together would be unstoppable. I was certain Children's Sci-Fi Saturday could not fail. As promising as our partnership seemed, Karol's schedule was problematic. He was helping conduct a light festival in the capital and would be unavailable to view the factory until a week before the event. This was undoubtedly an obstacle to organizing and promoting Children's Sci-Fi Saturday, but Karol was quick to dismiss my worries. His team worked efficiently and had all the necessary resources at their disposal. If I required images for promoting material, I could simply utilize artificial intelligence to generate them. Karol assured me that whatever the computer presented to the parents could be easily replicated. I took Karol at his word and followed his advice. With help from photographs I had taken during my initial tour of the factory, I generated magnificent images of promise. The main floor of the factory would be transformed into a dazzling spaceship interior, where children could contemplate the magic of interstellar travel. The loading bays would morph into a colorful mess hall where they would eat futuristic food disguised as jelly beans. The storage facilities would be illuminated by giant, friendly aliens that could be programmed to talk to their children and instill a deep sense of wonder and excitement about the possibility of extraterrestrial life. The old smokestacks of the factory that had lain dormant for nearly a century would transform into giant rockets that would lift off towards the skies. The artificial intelligence generated truly inspiring images. Carl assured me that each of the pictures could easily be brought into reality in the allotted time. Relying on his confidence, I made the event official and started to sell tickets. I had never marketed an event online, so I went through the process without any expectations. Would have been happy if we sold enough tickets to break even. What I found waiting for me on the phone in the morning took my breath away. I was not the only one who saw potential in the old factory. Within 24 hours, we had sold more tickets than a cement structure could conceivably hold. I quickly started to organize the visitors into shifts and even opened up a second Sunday slot. The second event sold out just as quickly as the first. Both me and Karel were beyond ecstatic. It had been a rough year for me financially, so the ticket money was more than welcome. Most of all, though, I was proud to bring that old factory to life. I was excited to bring joy into the lives of the local children. Everything seemed so perfect. And then, a week before the sold-out event was meant to take place, it all fell apart in the most terrible of ways. Carl's train for the capital didn't come until late, so when we met, it was already past sundown. Were he to arrive a week earlier, the warehouse would have been pitch dark. It wasn't until that morning that the factory's electrical supply had been resurrected in preparation for Carl's visit. Getting the fluorescents in the old building to shine again had been no bargain, but Carl's reaction made the bill worth it. "This is perfect," he beamed. "We can transform this entire space. We can make it a regular event. Children's Sci-Fi weekend. Think of the money." And I did think of the money. As I said, it was a rough year for me financially. I did think of the money, but most of all, I thought of the children. I thought of all the joy and wonder that Children's Sci-Fi Saturday and Children's Sci-Fi Sunday would bring to the community. Most of all, I thought about how I was doing something good. As we moved through the entryway of the building, Carl regaled me with his plans. When we reached the factory floor, his passion nearly broke into song. For half an hour, he walked me through how the barren industrial architecture around us would be transformed into a magnificent spaceship. I was a most rapturous audience. Karel was happy talking me through his process, yet as his magnificent plan came to an end, he told me he needed some time on his own. There were measurements for him to take, technical issues to contend with that were beyond my scope of knowledge. He excused himself for a solitary walk through the factory, and I happily obliged him. I wandered around the main hall. I was walking through a structure of cold cement and rusted metal, but I was elsewhere entirely. With one foot, I walked through soothing memories of an untamed youth. With the other, I moved through Carl's vision manifested. I imagined how the cement walls would be swallowed by light, how wondrous the visions of space travel would be, how the old factory would be brought to life once more. In the depths of my heart, I could already hear the laughter and joy. My daydreams came to a sudden halt when I heard my name called. Carl sounded uneasy. He wanted me to join him right away. I'd known Carl for years, and I had never seen him scared. He was always loud and boisterous and faced all danger with his fist raised. The man I met in the loading dock had his shoulders slumped. His hands were clawed into the sides of his jacket in sheer discomfort. Did you put this here? He stuttered. A mirror propped up against the wall. It was one of those funhouse mirrors you would find in a circus or a maze. It obscured my reflection, yet did not do so in any zany or comical fashion. I did not look taller or wider or like a silly gnome. My face was being pulled apart in directions that gave my appearance a monstrous quality. I looked like some horrid ogre. I was about to tell Carl that I had no idea where the mirror had come from, but the words got stuck in my throat. Past the monstrous form that my reflection painted on the mirror, there was something more disturbing. Behind me, smudged by the ghastly bends of the image, I could see movement. There was no one in the loading dock with us. In the mirror, above my monstrous head, something was clearly moving. When I turned and looked, all I could see were the shuttered doors of an empty loading dock. Each time I turned to look behind me, the fluorescent lights flickered. It was as if the universe itself didn't approve of my investigation. I was being warned. It was while I had my back turned that Carl started to scream. When I followed his gaze to see what had alarmed him, I too couldn't suppress my horror. Someone, or something, had been hiding behind the mirror. It wore a long black robe and a mask of shined metal. Even though the outlines of its tattered gown seemed to suggest human limbs, the creature moved on all fours with the tempo of a cautious spider. With its masked face betraying no emotion, the thing crawled towards Karel. His fists clawed deeper into his jacket. The man was paralyzed with fear, as was I. The figure that shared the loading dock with us defied all explanation. Suddenly, the robed creature braced. As if it were a cat stretching in the sun, the being flexed its long, dark limbs. When the figure pulled its body forward, its neck continued to travel. Like a malformed giraffe, the masked face traveled towards Carl's terrified form. Carl's lips trembled. In a barely audible wheeze, he named the creature before him. The unknown, he said. The moment the words left Carl's lips, a horrid inhuman hiss rose from behind the beast's mask. The being's long neck retracted into its body as if it were a vacuum extension cord. The moment the creature leaped at Karel, I ran. As I escaped, I spared a single panicked glance towards my friend. He was still standing upright with his fingers dug into the sides of his jacket. The robed figure had straddled him and had its masked head pressed against the side of his face. My friend looked to be trapped by the creature, but I ran regardless. I have never been a brave man. It was always Karel who approached threats with a sense of resistance. When I burst out of the doors of the factory, I immediately took my phone to call the authorities. I started to shriek about how my friend had been assailed by some terrifying beast of nightmare, yet after a couple frantic sentences with dispatch, Karel emerged from the factory himself. His body was unscathed, but he was in deep shock. When I questioned him about what had happened, he struggled to articulate a response. Only after I grasped him by the shoulders and shook him did Karel manage to speak. "It whispered," he said, his voice drenched in a shiver that made gooseflesh crawl up my own spine. "The unknown whispered horrors into my ear." When I asked Karel what exactly the creature had told him, he turned catatonic once more. It wasn't until I announced that the police were on their way that he snapped out of his shock. He did not want to be interviewed by the authorities. He refused to speak further of the unknown. Karel had also decided that he would not spend the night at my place, as we had previously agreed. He would sleep at his parents' house, and there was no convincing him otherwise. Before the flashing lights of the authorities arrived at the old factory, Karel had disappeared into the night. The entire experience with the robed figure had left me shaken, but the true discomfort of the situation didn't dawn upon me until the police had arrived. I, naturally, had no interest in entering the factory and was horrified by the idea of a lone patrol being sent in to investigate. The two grizzled officers were dismissive of my warnings. When I told them that a horror beyond comprehension lured within the loading dock of the factory, they simply pointed at their guns and smiled. They were safe, they said. The police were quietly dismissive of my warnings when they first arrived. When they walked out of the factory 20 minutes later, their disbelief morphed into good cheer. There was nothing there, they said. The warehouse was empty. If my story about the robed figure wasn't so entertaining, they claimed, I would have been subject to a fine of misuse of emergency services. My insistence that there was indeed a demon holding a mirror in the factory produced laughter at first. Yet when I swore that I was not joking, the older of the officers shed a smile. He, once again, repeated the height of the fine for misuse of emergency services. He then, sternly, told me that the Messianic Psychiatric Institute wasn't too far away. If I insisted there was a demon inside of the factory, I would not only be subject to the aforementioned fine, the officers would also arrange accommodation for me in the hospital. I did not argue with the police. The fine was entirely out of my budget, and I could not afford to be committed to a psychiatric institute. Instead, I went back to my empty home and desperately hoped to wake up in a world where the entire affair was a horrid dream. I spent much of the night worried about my sanity, yet when the morning came, I was struck with another, more palpable anxiety. Karel wrote me an email. He had left with the first morning train back to the capital. He would not be able to help me in putting together Children's Sci-Fi Saturday, or Children's Sci-Fi Sunday for that matter. Karel knew organizing the event must have been expensive, but to him, the horrors which hide within the factory surpassed all possible financial strain. He insisted I cancel the event, for both my sake and the sake of the children. I wrote back to him many times. I have called and I have texted, and I have even journeyed to the capital to ring on his doorbell. Karel has not returned any of my attempts at communication. As his email stated, he would not reconsider. I keep hoping that maybe he will change his mind, that maybe he will realize that this event going awry will destroy both my standing in the community and with the bank. I die for my phone whenever I hear the chime of an email notification, yet my hopes are always dashed by that little screen. Karel has not reached out. Instead, my inbox is filled with excited parents asking about details of the event. Some are coming from the other side of the country just to see the sci-fi wonderland I have sold them. Refunds are out of the question, for I have spent much of the money already. The cancellation is unthinkable. I sit here, a man on the edge, less than 24 hours before the first children are meant to arrive at the factory. I have tried to bring my promises to life without Karel's help. I have sourced decorations from a defunct movie studio and hired local teenagers and spent what little money I had on internet freelancers. I have done my best. But my best is not enough. The event will still be an unmitigated disaster. Soon, the children and their parents will come. They will come and there will be hell to pay. It was meant to be a fun Children's Day. It was meant to be an afternoon filled with delight and imagination and joy. I had it all planned out. I considered everything that could go wrong and tried to account for it. I have considered everything except for the factor of the unknown. Sup ghouls, it's me, Mike, the guy who writes all these stories. So, as you might have noticed, there's been some changes to the release schedule and the way the intros for the stories work. Personally, I like having an intro before the story starts, but if YouTube analytics are to be trusted, going straight into the tale makes the video significantly more attractive to the algorithm. For this little unknown series, I'll try going straight into the stories and see whether that affects the numbers at all. Speaking of which, the Unknown series has 4 chapters, and they will be launching every Thursday from here on out. Another scheduling adjustment suggested by the big computer in the cloud. Here's to hoping that this improves the numbers and gets some strangers stumbling into our midst. As usual, all 4 chapters, both in text form and in audio form, are available early on patreon.com/MikeJLanger. If you want to binge and support the show in the process, drop on by. The next Big Shared Universe series is slowly crawling towards completion and should hopefully be releasing at some point in May. Once that series has finished its run, there's going to be some changes to the channel, but I'll make a big old video explaining everything before that happens. The series also has 20 plus episodes, so it's going to be a while until that comes to pass. Thank you for all your support, patience, and an extra special thanks to patrons which help keep the lights on, such as Bob Kondirk, Dante Kincaid, Joyce, Matt, Mr. Creepypasta, Paul Evans, and Shion. See y'all next week. Hope everyone is safe, sane, and healthy out there.